to this slide right here. So in OutSystems, you can think of it as us leading in 4 key areas. We're full stack. We're able to integrate and extend anything. We're full life cycle, and your experience can range across a wide variety of devices. When I say full stack, our development breaks down into 4 aspects, and you see that here with the UI, the logic, the process, and the data. Let me kick it into slideshow mode real quick. And that's how our IDE is broken it down as well, the Service Studio. In OutSystems, you're also able to integrate and extend anything. Out of the box, we have REST and SOAP and SAP integrations. When I say REST and SOAP, we can consume and expose REST APIs and SOAP APIs. We integrate with many of the enterprise systems. We have an open source Forge with now upwards of 4,000 components on it. And then we're also integrating with any flavor of database that you can imagine out there right now. We're not just an application development platform, or not just at building the applications, we're also the software development lifecycle. And so we have technology, we call it our lifetime application, that facilitates the promotion of an application across your development, your test, and production environments, and make sure that you don't leave dependencies behind or introduce versions that do break other applications. Because who's done that, where you promote an application into production and you bring a dependency that maybe was used by something else, and then it conflicts and causes unknown issues that you maybe weren't prepared for. And then again, I mentioned that your experience can range across a wide variety of devices. Say you with a single code base, you can have a native Android and iOS app and be exposing web services with that. And so on screen is the architecture, the actual platform architecture of OutSystems. You'll see that we have that Service Studio, that IDE that I mentioned. Then we have Lifetime, which is the facilitator of the promotion of and governance of your application across your development, your QA, and production environments. Then we have Service Center that allows us to view into each one of these environments. And every platform has a minimum of these 3 environments within it. And you're probably going, well, what's inside one of those environments? And this is within it, we have a load balancer and front-end servers. In front end, and we have a minimum of 2 front-end servers per production environment. So that way, as users come in, the load is distributed. And then we have a database that's connected behind, and you can replicate that. And now you're probably wondering, well, what's in one of those front-end servers? It's a Windows stack. It's running off of IIS. So nothing magical. And that's one of the advantages of OutSystems is if you were to separate ways with OutSystems, you can actually take the applications that you built and continue a life cycle with them, hosting them on IIS, building them in Visual Studio, and compiling them. So just wanted to go over the hardware there, the platform architecture before I get back into the software and the application architecture. Are there any questions around the general architecture there, the platform and OutSystems in general? All right. So let's get back into our application architecture and talking about best practices for that. So if you recall, when building an application, I spoke about these 3 layers. And so with that, we want to make sure that we name things that remind us which layer they're actually part of. And so it'll reveal the nature of each module, to enforce the architecture, and to normalize known patterns. And we'll talk a little bit about those patterns.
Scott, let's
yes.
One question here from the audience. So Joseph is asking how versions are created when deploying.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I heard that well.
How are versions created when an application is deployed? So I'm guessing the question is, how is it compiling to create a version of the application?
Okay, gotcha. So when I click my one-click publish in the Service Studio, what happens is it sends that application's essentially source code that we've built behind the scenes out to out to the web server, the front end server, to be compiled. And so we're not doing in an interpreted language. This is compiled and performant. But I want to, is that in alignment with your question, or am I missing it here? I think there's maybe more a deeper question here, or maybe an understanding that I need to get to.
Yeah, I think that's on a high level exactly how a version is defined. So that's fine.
Okay, I see that the question was in chat. Okay, so how are versions created when deploying? Okay, so yeah, that's a couple. So Lifetime itself records the versions, so that way, if I say had a common a core module that was used across 2 applications, if I had done some development between the releases of those 2 applications that that are sharing that core module, Lifetime is the one that records that version and then makes sure that we don't end up with a version mismatch of what's actually in runtime. So that's how it's being recorded, and it's actually when I then say promote to from my development then to QA and then into production. Each time you do that, we're versioning that that promotion, so we don't end up in a state where we've introduced changes and we're not ready for them. That's how it's done.
Hey, Scott, can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yes.
So if you have, and I don't know what the right terminology in OutSystems is yet, but if you have 2 different modules that are dependent on a third module, let's say, and you're currently doing some work on, module B, and the underlying module that is dependent on, so you're making new versions of that. This module over here, this module A, really it hasn't been enhanced to utilize the new features that you just developed in that module. Basically the question is, can you have 2 different versions of this dependent module kind of instantiated at the same time? How does that handle that?
No. So if you're going to have, if you're going to essentially fork the code, you'd have to make a copy of it. It would give you a warning saying there's a version mismatch. You've got to resolve this. Gotcha. So part of that promotion process is validating all of that versioning, and then making sure that you're not breaking things, and making sure that also things like database columns and database schemas haven't changed. And if they have, say with external databases, it lets you know. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And then there's also the other aspect of it where we don't want any upwards references. And that's part of what helps prevent getting into a situation where you have where you have conflicts of versions like that. If it's going downward, you're able to, it's a bit more flexible, and that you run into that problem much less. And that'll be a bit more apparent when I talk about some examples here shortly. Excellent questions, everybody. Okay, yeah, here we go. So for naming conventions for the foundation modules, since these are non-functional, usually around the database, things on that lower level, you can see that in this case we're saying underscore library to designate it as a underscore lib, sorry, to designate it as a library, underscore is to highlight it as an integration service. This is what you would use to say connect to maybe some specific web service out there. If you had a specific API you wanted to connect with, you could do it with this layer, and then you build your core services on top of that, which would be this core module. And that way, in the event your web services change, you only work on this module. And then if you need to, the impact up this is minimized. You might have to make slight adjustments to your core modules, but the impact is dramatically reduced if there is any at all. Usually, because of your doing this architecture, it's handled on this in the layer in which these foundation modules. DRV for drivers. So if I was doing like an integration with, say, like a Zebra printer, this is how I would name my module. TH for themes. So if you had CSS you had brought in to your application, your corporate branding, you can make that, you can you can have that as a module and then call it _th for themes. And then patterns, if you had a singleton or other programming patterns, this is one way you can designate it. I've seen that used much less though, because in OutSystems we have best practices, which are essentially already using patterns. And so just something to keep in mind. And that's part of the tech lead path and certification, which I'll pitch at the very end as kind of next steps. And then plugins. With OutSystems, you're also able to do plugins for your mobile. So if you maybe had a custom camera plugin, this is how you would name it. And then, sorry, I forgot to mention, if you put M in front of it, then it's mobile. So if we had a mobile plugin, it would be mplug. And you can see that designated here. And so then let's talk about how to rename or how to name reusable services or the business services. And so we normally do core services, which is _CS. Or _BL if it's business logic. And usually with, real quick with CS, those are normally connected to then an integration service, so this IS. They usually walk hand in hand as pairs. That's a discussion for another day. We might get into it a little bit later. We'll see if we've got time. But then we also have blocks and then core widgets. And so once you start building with reusability in mind, blocks start to become very key to that life cycle. And then we have engines for doing calculations and things like moving of batches. And then sync for things doing sync. So if I have maybe an offline mobile synchronization, I would have msync here. And that's very common to have an offline synchronization pattern. Or in the event that you're trying to crunch a lot of data, sometimes you need to make sure that things are working as you intend them. And so a sync pattern might be used. And then API for APIs, if you wanted to do expose APIs. And then same rule as below, where if you have M in front of it, that designates mobile. And then end user is for the user interface and process. So think of your UI UX. And not really much of a specific naming convention. We're naming screens there. So whatever, and keep in mind that the screen names are part of the URL. So there is customization to that, but if you don't choose to customize it, the way you name things in the end user modules does in the screen specifically show up, but there's not necessarily a specific naming convention for them. So let's talk about, let's do an example here. We're going to do a business case, design process, blueprint, and a reference map. And so in our example, we've got, we want to do a doctor's appointment. And so we've got 5 requirements to satisfy. We need to allow doctors to see their agenda and their patients' exams and to select urgent cases. That's the first requirement. Second is doctors in different units from different hospitals, doctors work in different units rather. Third requirement is it's got to interact with Google Calendar. Fourth requirement is it's got to notify doctors of updates. And fifth requirement is it's got to have a web application to support the creation of appointments. And it can be handled by essentially a planner or a dispatcher. And so we have kind of what that pattern looks like here, where we disclose, we're going to organize, we're going to assemble. And then that assemble goes back up to disclosing it back up to the doctor, and then they can reorganize. It's kind of the pattern you need to keep in your mind when talking through how we're going to build this in terms of the naming convention behind each of these pieces to satisfy these requirements. So let's start architecting it out. So we want to just, what's the disclosed part look like? So we want to allow the doctors to see the agenda and see their patient's exam and to select urgent cases. And so we have see agenda, we need to see the exams, and we need to select our urgent cases. So we've now got those on the end user as stuff that has to be done by somebody. Now we need to organize. So allow doctors to see their agenda and to see patients. So we have the core, which is the doctor. And then we have an exam and then the patient. So we're starting to think of things almost more like, what can, who are our players in this? And then doctors work in different units from different hospitals. So we see units and hospitals. So we got that in our core. And then they need to interact with Google Calendar to represent the appointments and find doctors' availability. So it's going to be down in the, we'll have an appointment, but then we're also going to have some in the foundation layer too. That's where we have our Google Calendar. And if you recall, that's where we'll start doing the naming, but that would be more of one of those integration services here, where this would be more of the core services. And so you'll see that as we rename these here shortly. And then fourth requirement is to notify doctors of created and updated appointments. So we have text messages and push notifications, a plugin specifically to do that. And then this wants to be done through a web app with multiple roles. And so we have an appointment planner. All right, so now we need to assemble it. So that's part of what we'll be doing with renaming these essentially. So let's look at that top layer where we have our agenda, where we're looking at agendas, we're looking at exams, and we're selecting those cases, those urgent cases. That's the doctor app. That's the doctor's experience side of things. And we've designated it mobile because we want them to either work on it on a tablet or their phone because that's what they've got on them at the time. And we've also got our appointment planner over here designated with an icon for a desktop experience. And the doctor also has to handle the exam. And that's part of the doctor and the patient. It's part of that. And then the unit and hospital are also all part of that. But then it's also going to be part of the appointment planner too. So now we've got the doctor mobile side of things over here, where we need to have some core services to handle that doctor app. That's what we're representing here. And then we have some appointment widgets, which will be part of what this appointment, how do you interact with the appointments? How does a doctor do things? That's what the doctor widget is over here. And now we need to work with our foundation modules. So we have our doctor app theme, because we want to have our corporate branding, and then the planner theme, which would be in alignment with our planner over here. So now we have our blueprint of all the modules that we need. Again, we have our top layer, which is what our end users are interacting with. So those doctors and then the appointment planner. We have everything that each one of those needs. So the common things would be like the appointment, the hospital, the doctor, the exam, and the patient. But then things that are specific to, say, like the doctor app would be like doctor widgets, doctor mobile, and then doctor app theme. And you can see the same thing with our appointment planner widgets, our appointment planner and theme. And you can see that we're starting to sketch that out. How does all this connect? What does that look like? And so you can see where we've got our appointment planner, and it's going to need the appointment widgets, the theme, and the theme. And you can see Doctor app is going to need the doctor widgets and theme. But then what else does it need? And you can see that's starting to connect here. It needs the push notifications. Then needs the Doctor Mobile. But what's Doctor Mobile need? Needs the appointment, and it needs the doctor. And then what's the appointment going to need? And you'll see that starting to come together here. Move this out of the way. Move some of the Zoom things just a second. There we go. Now I can see better. And so now you can see the appointment connecting to that calendar, and then the text messages, and then the push notifications, and then everything else that connects to it. You know, where you've got the appointment planner coming in here. And you get the idea, where essentially we're starting to connect it all together, with this being the final connection of how all the modules are interconnected and can be visualized. Definitely, I would reorganize this to be a little bit more linear and visually pleasing if I was going to, you know, have this as like a final representation. But because this is a little hard to read, especially if you're going to show this to you know, people that are your stakeholders. I organize this a little bit more flat, but nonetheless, you can see that we have all of our connections here. So now we need to name this. How do we get this from the architecture that's our visual description of it into Service Studio? So now we're going to start. What would we call these modules? So let's start working on the renaming part of that. And so we'll start with those core modules, because as mentioned earlier, we have our end user modules, which you don't want to have spaces in those. So that's just been removed out of them. That's the only difference up there. Core modules, we name them as mentioned earlier with that _CS. And then our appointment is a business logic. And you can see we've done that here with the BL. And now we're going to do our Doctor Mobile. It's going to be M for mobile, and then the business logic around that. And then our Doctor widgets is the mobile, and then core widgets. So you can see how we've renamed all of that. And so now we can start translating that straight into something that we can where we are able to build these modules now in Service Studio and name them. And now we're going to start doing the same thing with our foundation modules. So push notification plugin. And then these calendars are integration services. So _IS. And then our themes. In this case, we've got our mobile theme. So MTH, and then planner, just _TH. So in terms of naming, does all that make sense? Are there any questions?
I do have a question, Scott. When you say like the Doctor MBL mobile business logic, what are you thinking that's going to be different than? Like, seems to me like you would have a Doctor BL, and I can't imagine what would be in the mobile business logic. In other words, it seems to me like you would build your business logic that would be independent of whether you're talking about web or mobile, and it would be the visual things that would take place at the mobile level or the web level, but they would still use the Doctor business logic. So all that was written in one place. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit it. You've hit it pretty much dead on. You know, what would this be essentially? You know, and it would be rules to handle maybe the synchronization, what happens after synchronization, or packaging that into that business logic. But then keep in mind that the appointment planner doesn't need to interact with this doctor's mobile business logic. And so it's really just contained to this mobile app. If we had maybe a desktop experience, then that would be, it'd be a common module between those two, certainly. And then it may not make, it wouldn't necessarily make sense to have an M in front of it, but if there were, and keep in mind that not all these modules even need to have stuff in it. This is more of a hypothetical situation. And so, let's see here, what would we maybe put in that? It's just, you know, if there was maybe rules that said the doctors only work from 9 to 5, you know, and don't work on the weekends, that's the type of stuff that could be in that business logic. So, you know, what rules, in fact, that's actually goes into the appointment business logic, to be fair, because as you can see that's more of a generic rule across all appointments. But if there was here, logic that if there was logic that pertains specifically to how a doctor's layout is and its UI, maybe that this is where it, well, not even the UI. It's more of this is where functions would be crunched. So if you needed to do, you know, client side or server side function, this is where you would write that. So checking like user relationships. So maybe if you wanted to check if the doctor's user was even authorized to see certain information, you'd want to do it in a core module server side, because you don't want that happening client side. And so that's maybe some logic that you would have there. And potentially looking to reuse it. If you had maybe another doctor's app, you'd want to reuse that logic.
Yeah, I wasn't really like questioning your organization, just wondering if in the OutSystems world there would be some mobile specific things that you might want to have in a business logic layer. Obviously, that's all dependent on how you're architecting your application or whatever, which business rules you put in which places or whatever. But so yeah, that's you've answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
And Scott, may I add something to what you already said? So another thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just by having the name difference with the M versus like not having it at all, when you are actually consuming an API and you're trying to integrate to that logic from an external application, it may make it easier to identify it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that might be another reason for adding the M versus not the M, even if it's self-explanatory because it comes from the mobile design.
Yeah, that, and then it definitely helps with you know, housekeeping, essentially, where you can now find your applications and the namings make sense. You know, if you look at the high code languages, they all have best practices around naming, whether or not, you know, people actually follow them or, you know, completely different. You know, you look at Java and C#, they have naming conventions around them. And so that's what we're, you know, bringing to OutSystems here, you know, so that it does make sense. And, you know, that if somebody were to come in and take a look at your app, that they're not completely lost, that things do make sense. And then further, when it comes to an analysis of your applications in the future, looking at your technical debt and reducing them, we have our architecture dashboard, which allows you to see all your modules. When you've named them this way, it's a bit more obvious as to what it is and potentially and the role that it's playing, as opposed to just appointment, you know, or exam. You know, now with this being exam underscore CS, it's like, oh, it's the core services that helps us bring together essentially what an exam can do. And so that's and that architecture dashboard helps. In fact, I should just show you that really quick, because it's one of the things that's particularly special about OutSystems that I'll show you real quick, because since this is a big discussion around architecture, this is one way to do an analysis of your architecture and make sure that you are following those best practices. Here you can see all the applications I have. And so let's take a look at one that had, and so it's a heat map for applications that have high technical debt. And so we could take a look at one that has high technical debt. Let's look at the County of San Diego City Services back office proof of concept that I did. You'll notice that it has the modules actually here. If I had more than one module, they would be organized and well, they'd be listed out here, and I'd be able to then rapidly know what the module is doing because of my naming convention. But then we can drill down into these and see specifically why it has high technical debt. You know, in this case, we have public entities aren't read-only, and it's what's the impact of that? We can see that as a developer now, and then we can see how to fix that, and we can see what those entities are. Another example would be if we exposed, you know, a REST web service and we didn't put any security on it. Here's an example of what of that exact thing being done, and then how to fix it. And then we don't always have to fix these. We can say that it's already fixed, a false positive. We're not going to fix it, or we'll come back to it later. We have I have some of my accounts that I work with use this as a checkpoint, that they have to make sure every finding on this list is handled, or they have a reason for it before they're even able to go into production. And they have very high quality apps because of that. But if you haven't had a chance to work with Architecture Dashboard, this is something that's included with the OutSystems platform, and you can obtain it from our Forge. Any questions around the Architecture Dashboard before I move on? Okay, excellent. Okay, so now we're going to talk about typical module elements. So,
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Sorry. Can you go back to your last slide that you had? One more question.
Sure.
In your mind, what would be the types of things that you would put into your, say, Dr. BL, whether it's MBL or not, versus what's in your Dr. Core Services module?
Yeah, so the core services can be thought of as the link that goes between the anything that's the integration services down here. That's one of the ways that it's used. So it would be bringing together the Google Calendar and the text message and any of the other integration services that are needed for the doctor. And so that way these integration services can change. So say like the Google Calendar API changed, the only change needs to be the only change that has to happen is here. Then you can update this module and re-release it without having to re-release multiple applications and all that. And then having, you know, to change this Doctor core module. Does that make sense?
So like maybe a notify function, you'd call Doctor notify, and it would know underlying what a notification means. So you could change that out and do whatever. And maybe at the Doctor business logic, well, it would be like you talked about earlier, you know, ensuring that an appointment only gets scheduled during their working hours or whatever. There's more like a business rule type of function.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Precisely.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, and the way I normally think about it is, you know, that is UI, user experience, is your top layer. The bottom layer is your integrations, and then the core modules is everything else. That's kind of that's the way I visualize it when I'm building, and that's a good quick rule of thumb. It won't pass the tech lead certification, but that's the rule of thumb, I'd say.
And I guess if you had CRUD functions, you'd put those in your CS modules.
Yeah. So exactly. That's exactly it.
Okay.
And we'll see
Cool.
examples of that shortly.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep moving to the next slide. You have any other questions before I move on? Okay. I don't want to feel like I'm cutting you off. Okay, excellent. So typical module elements. So we've spoken about what's in these end user, core, and foundation. And so And you kind of hit just a little bit about a little bit on that, Patrick, of what is in these, and so if we talk about the foundation modules, the very bottom layer, we're talking about the data, the structures for inputs. We're talking obviously no core entities, and then the logic to normalize APIs and exception handling. And single sign-on session logic. It's a bit more rare. A lot of that's handled out of the box with some of our well, not necessarily Forge components, but our users module. And then common roles to the domain and users. So if you had other user roles that were like administrator. And it says UI interface here. I would disagree with that, but nonetheless, you could put UI patterns like blocks. It says calendar and accordion as an example. I kind of lean towards those would be more in the core services or layer, but that this is the official stance. And themes and layouts. And we spoke about themes. And so now let's talk about what's in those core services. And so you hit it already, right, Patrick, with those CRUD actions. That's where those were going to live. And then core entities. So if they're exposed as read only, and you saw that actually in my architecture dashboard in here that we're saying that's those needed to be marked read only because they're core services. And then logic for audit trails and integration logic. So, if you have users doing things, so that would be a good example of maybe the doctor's mobile business logic would be an audit trail of what a doctor did in the app potentially. And then service specific access features. So, if you're connecting to a core service, it's kind of the way to think of it. If you were going to expose an API and somebody needs a service account, this is where you would set up the role for that. I tend to lean that role though is more of a back end and more of that foundation layer. So in practice, that tends to end up more in the foundation layer than. But the official stance is that it's in your core modules or core services layer. And then interface, your business, the business blocks. So the reusable components of your UI, which are the block components. Oh, and then processes. I was forgetting that one, but your asynchronous data processes. So things like your workflow, that's handled also in your core services. So in OutSystems, you can build workflows and you assign screens to them and their checkpoints. And so that those live in the core services or the core modules layer. And then let's talk about that end user at the very top layer. It's all the UI stuff. So the auxiliary elements to just work with the UI, the whole user experience. And then the logic also to support the UI specifically. And then the interface around it. And when I say data to support the UI and logic, what I mean by that is, let's say I have a button that is to save forum data. That I would have or not even that. Say I have temporary structures where I've just got to put stuff into a table and then maybe move it to something else later down the road. Static data, those are usually done on the end user modules. And so now let's do let's talk about our doctor's app again and do another example here. So now we've got our doctor's app here and everything all named correctly. Okay, I'm like, I kind of threw me for a loop there for a second. So let's talk about what's in the doctor's mobile theme. So it's really in the doctor's mobile app would be common roles, login logic, the layouts, exception flows, and mobile UI. In practice, it really ends up just being the theme exclusively, which in Service Studio you can save the themes and stuff, and I'll show you that and how to break out these things if I have time.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I was just wondering, will we have enough time for the hands-on? Is that something that might be more interesting for the users to learn today? Or I don't know. Since we have a smaller group, I kind of want to get a feel from everybody's perspective. What would you like to do?
Are you asking me or the audience?
I guess everyone. You're the audience too for me. So it depends. I know you had everything planned out. We have more questions in the discussion. So I don't know if you think we may get to the entire presentation or you want to jump straight to the demo. It's up to you.
I'm good with, I'll just jump straight to the demo and talk about how you actually do these things in practice, because theory is one thing. Let's actually start breaking some things out of an application.
We are developers. I think we have more fun when things are done than when they are explained. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, you bet. So let's break out of the presentation here.
And by the way, I am recording this and I will send out the slide deck, just so if everybody has a question on how certain principles were understood today, then you can have a reference later on. So I will do that.
Excellent. So Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the teams built the product catalog or had a chance to take a few swings at it.
Yes, so thank you for bringing this up. So in our previous session, for those of you who are new, and this might be the only session that you are experiencing from the Richmond RVA group. So we had a progressive web app design with very simple use case. We actually got through 3 sections, which was bootstrapping data, integrating it. Well, actually, the API was not yet integrated to this app. I don't know, Tom, did you get to that part yourself? Maybe after we.
I didn't do anything with it after. Wouldn't see how
All right.
I'm trying to log in right now.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But we had a very small use case for a progressive web app. And right now, this app contains a one module and API integration in addition to the entire UI UX. So what Scott wanted to do is separate these two, and therefore you can have a better understanding on how and why modules might need to be separated from an application for a reusability standpoint. So thank you, Scott. If you have any questions about this, please reach out to me and I'll provide all the materials for the exercise that we built before.
Excellent. So yeah, on screen, I've got the product catalog app that was created. So it's very flat right now. If we look at it, it's just one module. So let's see here. If we go back here, click on it, you can see that it's just one module at the moment. And so that's not the best practice. What you would want to do is have multiple modules because it supports reusability. And then also, if you had a bigger team, it's easier to separate work lanes based on modularity as well. But what we're going to do though is take this product catalog and let's start by splitting out the API in it to a core services layer. So I go to the logic, you'll notice I have a simple API call here that I've exposed called get count of products. And all it does is it just returns the an integer, which is the count of products that we've got in our products database. You can see that here. Get our products, assign it to the out. Nothing super fancy. But what we want to do is not have this reside here. We want this outside in another module. That's really the best place for it. And so what we do is we come over to our database and we right click on, or we click on it. You notice that we have public and it exposes read only. So I want to change those both to yes. And if you remember, there was that tech in the architecture dashboard, how there was the note about expose read only, and that you want to make sure that you and what this does is it just forces you to use your CRUD methods. That's really what this is doing. But if I make it public, that means I can bring it in as a dependency in another module. And so I've marked it as yes. And so now let's start creating that core services module. So we come over here, let's add a module, and we're going to call it, well, it's actually the API. So we'll call it, we'll call it core, it is an API. So it's product catalog _ API is really what this is. And then this is a service. You notice we have options here. You could do blank. Service gives you a few things out of the box. Libraries meant for reusability, and you do an _lib for that one. And an extension is used with Integration Studio to further extend out systems. But we're going to do a service. So we're going to create that module. And what we need is our database first. So if we come over here, you notice we don't have our database. And so we go to our plugin over here. And we go get our product catalog. Here it is. And then we're going to bring in our product table. You can see now we've got it. And now we want to create our web service. And we could copy and paste if you, but we'll just recreate it really quick. So expose v1 get count of okay. And then all we do is just click and drag our products table onto our list over here, do our assign. We've got our web service done. That's it. So now we've now created our _ API module. We've got our web service now running in it. And now we can come back over here and appropriately remove this because we've split it out.
Oh. Yeah. Well, a little too late. I was going to ask you to show how you would, rather than recreating it, let's say it was a much more involved API, how would you cut and paste or copy and paste that over or import it or whatever you'd have to do?
Yeah, I just copy and come over here. Paste.
I mean, that seems simple enough.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys could have made it a little bit more complicated,
No, building web services and showing this. In fact, it even goes. It's even cooler than that. Like, check this out. We have documentation that gets created for you automatically for it also. So we've got now the documentation of how to use it. You can hand this now directly off to the developer that needs this web service. You've got the Swagger JSON. They can immediately start working with this.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, let's say that you already had been using that API in your product catalog module. Now you're refactoring, you're moving it into a different module. I'm assuming you'd have to make some changes to your whatever was referring to that already, correct?
Well, there's now you're getting into best practices around web services, and you notice that I have named this V1, and the whole reason behind that is in the event I change anything in my web services, I've got to now do a V2 because I can't trust that whatever's consuming those web services is ready for that change. I don't want to break whatever that is. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think you're saying that just moving it into another module that would necessitate it being a V2. So any code that was using it would now have to refer to the V2, right?
Exactly. That the URL is different.
Okay.
When you move it into a different module, and so actually, let me double check that. Yeah, and you can see that reflected right here. Product catalog underscore API versus product catalog. And so you want to design with this in mind ahead of time so you don't have to do that rework. So in this case, I'm not able to delete this out because I don't know who's referencing it. And then in this, I would really call this V2, and maybe in the description, make a note that V1 exists in end user module. So that way I don't get lost or go, hey, where is V1? In the event someone's referencing it. So the description is one way that we allow for commenting on things that aren't necessarily like flows. Or I could also have put it in here too. I could put a comment in here to remind the next person.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, you make a good point that, if this is being referenced, you really can't delete this because you don't want to break whatever's referencing it. You have to plan for that ahead of time. It's kind of the way to think about it.
So, I mean, you made the comment that, best practices around API calls, but let's say it was not an API call. It was just, and I don't know what you call it in OutSystems. It was a function call, it was like, get doctor's hours or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an API call specifically. Would you still be faced with the same problem that now that you moved it into another module, you have to change any code that was referring to that?
Oh, so yes, because if you look at the way the dependencies work, you notice that it's all based on bringing in specific pieces. So if I change the location of one of these, I then have to go to those other things and tell it where it is. And so, it's all part of why you would want to plan for the modularity, so that way things are already broken apart and you're not having to break them apart and refactor in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I would design it, right? But if I'm taking over someone else's code, all bets are off, right? So
exactly. And I can't tell you how often I come in to do a application architecture review and I see a monolithic application and it's, oh no, guys, this is more than a review. This is, I have to then, do a whole deep best practices discussion and go, who built this? And let's get them the tech lead certification so that way they can re-architect this, or the next one they build isn't this way.
Right. Cool. All right. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, you bet. Let's see here. I know I've spoken to a few of the reusability components. I mentioned that there's these themes. Here's the example of the theme, and you can see that it can be broken out the same way, where you set this to public, yes, and you can then inherit it, or you can create its own module around it.
So I guess in order to be like correctly named, should it be like product catalog _ph, or does it matter in this particular case? So that's only on the module level.
Yeah, so we would go like, yeah, product catalog underscore th, the theme. And then I can come over here. And then copy. Then paste into here. So you can see now I've got the product catalog in the theme. And then if I publish this will move it to runtime. Oh, I forgot to set it to public. Let me do that. Yes. So now I can I get it as a dependency. 1 second, let me wait for this to finish. All right, we'll resend it. And then I can go back over, once this is done, I can go back over to the product catalog and then now consume this product catalog's theme. All right, so if I go over here, now I can click the plugin, can search all. So there's the product catalog underscore theme. Can bring that in, apply. So there it is now. And now I can use it. And I can get rid of this one. I don't need to use this one anymore. So that's how it's done. Are there any more questions? Anything that you guys would like to see? Any questions in general about OutSystems? And how are we doing on time, Carla?
I mean, we have 5 minutes. It's very like more than 5 minutes, really. Yeah, more or less, take 7 minutes or so. So my I guess my idea is yeah, just make this an interactive, more of a conversation and not necessarily a presentation. I think when Scott and I were talking about how we wanted to do this, we like to make it more personable than just like us talking to you. So yeah, please feel free to give feedback and comment on this as we go. And then one other request. Let's share some resources there. Yeah, so we're good.
Okay. Yeah, I put into chat the link here to the tech lead certification and the path. That's so in OutSystems, the topics that we covered today are a bit more in the advanced realm. You know, they're normally taught after you become a reactive developer, and even then after you've done the mobile learning as well. So you learn the architecture best practices and how to architect applications in this tech lead certification path. And at the very end of it, you can take an exam to become a certified tech lead at OutSystems. So I would recommend if you've already done some of the if you've already done the reactive training and mobile, that this would be a great next step. And it's what I recommend for architects and the leads of leads of your development teams.
You took the certification just recently, right, Scott?
Yeah, I did it in Q1. It's a challenging one, you know, like I mentioned earlier, that there's a little difference between the academic theory and then the actual application a little bit. It's a challenging exam, and there's a lot of great information that's covered, and some of the concepts that are covered are good practice for all software development. You know, it doesn't just apply to OutSystems, and we talk about the software development lifecycle. We talk about how to even build a team, gathering requirements, and iterations within that, not just patterns, but the patterns are a big piece of it as well. All right, folks. I think starting to lose my voice a little bit. Is there any other questions you've got for me? Otherwise, if you haven't had a chance to play with OutSystems, you can go to our trial site also. You can just Google up OutSystems free trial, and it'll take you right to our a site that'll allow you to do a lot of the same stuff that you just saw me do. It'll give you access to a download for Service Studio here, and this runs on Mac and PC. And then it'll also give you a small environment in which that you can build to and see apps in runtime.
I had to say this, Scott, not to put you on the spotlight, but Scott said that one of the things he does is one skill that he just always asks the clients, okay, what do you think that OutSystems cannot do? And then he just does it on the fly. So if anyone wants to throw one of those challenges that are 2 minutes or so long, then I'm sure he will probably have fun doing it. So not to throw you under the bus, but I thought that was funny when you told me about it.
Oh, it's true. That is one of the, yeah. So if anybody has anything that you think OutSystems can't do, let me know, and I can address that. It is a wonder product. Everybody must think it can do everything. So, but I mean, to be real, to realistically speak to that, in all my times of working with different people across this platform, I've only come across a single use case that we couldn't do. And in the end, it's more like we could do it, but it wasn't really up to the way that the customer wanted to do it. So it was one of the major CAD platforms wanted to have a marketplace where you're able to put in descriptions of what you wanted, and then out would come the object designed in CAD. Though possible to do that in OutSystems, they wanted to have pieces of their system installed into OutSystems, which we can do. You can self-manage the platform and do stuff like this. They didn't, the way I had me and some of the product management team had come up with how to do that solution. Just they weren't particularly happy with, but that's so the only time I've ever come across something like that. Otherwise, I get questions like, oh, well, how do you do this maybe specific UI thing? How do I do an integration with Salesforce? Nobody integrates with SAP very well. Prove to me you can. That type of, those are pretty common things. And you can see right there, we're connecting to SAP using a BAPI. We can also use OData as well. As a quick example.
Well, thank you all so much for being part of this session tonight. And I hope to see you on the upcoming session, which is going to be more probably more around the data structure. So Scott already knows about it. So we're just going to keep it a little bit more in mystery mode right now, but we'll disclose it very soon. So thank you, everyone. And if you don't have any more questions, then I will just finalize the recording here and then share all this information to everyone after the call. So thank you also, Scott, for your time. Scott volunteers for this event, so I really, really appreciate you being here tonight. Or today, I guess in California is pretty early still.
Yeah, you can see it's still light out there. Yeah, thank you everybody for listening to me talk for the last hour, and hope you learned something. And we look forward to having you at the next user group. We'll have another essay, one of my counterparts, Advait, speaking around SQL, NoSQL, like Carla had mentioned. So it's going to be a good time.
SQL or not SQL? That is the question. That's going to be the title. Okay, awesome. Well,
thank you guys.
So much. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.